So, you've learned hiragana and katakana, which means you can basically write anything in Japanese, right? Most learners think they can write their name in katakana, but many use unconventional forms. With a few adjustments, they could make it closer to how their names are actually pronounced. If your name has sounds that match Japanese phonetics, it's straightforward, like Ben, which becomes Ben. But many names don't fit so easily, and that's where learners often get confused. First of all, writing your name in katakana is not a direct translation of the spelling of your name. How would you write Sean in katakana? If you said Sean, then, as you can hear it, this sounds completely different from the original name. We usually write Sean instead. If your name is Sarah and if you directly change that into katakana, you may write Sara, but your name is actually pronounced closer to Sera, then that's what you should use. So your name should be written based on pronunciation. Katakana is used to represent the sounds of your name as closely as possible in Japanese. With this in mind, let's go through 11 useful tips to help you convert your name into katakana, from basic sound rules to the more complex parts of the process. Let's start with basic sound rules. When your name contains an L or an R, both sounds are generally represented by the same set of katakana characters. La, ri, ru, re, and lo. How do you write Laura in katakana? If you pronounce it as Laura, we write it as Lola. How about Linda? It's written as Linda. And Rod is? It's Loddo. Next, the V sound is usually written using babibubebo, although katakana does have a way to represent a distinct V sound in writing, but in reality, Japanese people pronounce it in the same way. So only use this special writing if you really want to be fancy. For instance, Kevin is typically written as Kevin or Kevin, though you may sometimes see it written as Kevin. Similarly, Violet is usually written as Violetto, but Violet is also possible and both sounds exactly the same. Later, I will show you the trickiest part of the writing names in katakana, so stay tuned. But first, let's look at the TH sound. What Japanese character would you use? This is pronounced as both a voiced and unvoiced sound. Use the Z or Z sound for the voiced TH and the S sound for the unvoiced TH. For example, Heather has a voiced TH sound, so it becomes Heather. On the other hand, Smith has an unvoiced TH sound, so it becomes Smith. But if your name has TH, but you don't actually pronounce it that way, then this rule doesn't apply. For example, Teresa starts with TH, but it's pronounced as a T sound, so that's Thomas. Now, let's move on to a bit more tricky conventions. When your name has a T or D with no vowel immediately following it, add an O sound after it. You may know that extra vowels are needed to express in katakana, but choosing which vowel to add is what confuses many students. When it comes to T or D, always use the O sound. So T becomes to and D becomes do. For example, Tracy will become Toreishi. Todd becomes Toddo. When your name has a following sound, K, G, M, F, V, L, S, G, TH, P, and B, not followed by any vowel, then add a U sound. For example, Brad becomes 불ado. Craig becomes Craig. Even though Craig starts with C, the actual sound is K, so you can use K. Before moving into more important topic of a silent pause and the long sound, let's cover a few more sound rules. T and D sounds are often written using standard katakana conventions and represented by T and D. For example, Tiana is Tiana, Dylan is Dylan. Although it's represented by dy, since it's read as D, you can apply the rule. Similarly, Dean is not written in di, but because it sounds D, we write Dean. QU and WHI may not be too common, but QU is represented by Ku, and WHI sound is often represented as hoi or ui. For example, Quincy is Quincy. Whitney is often written as Hoitoni, and Whitman is Hoitman. Next, we'll look at one of the main pain points for students. Let's dive in. Most students have difficulty knowing when to use the long sound in katakana names. When the original name contains ER, OR, AR, or EY, especially at the end, or followed by another consonant, use a long sound. Please keep in mind that there are exceptions as well, but these are often represented with a long sound. For example, Carter has both AR and ER in the name, and it becomes Kata. Taylor has OR at the end, and it becomes Taylor. And Ashley is Ashley. There are other times when long sounds are often used. Let's look at when that happens. When stress is placed on the part of the name other than the initial syllable, we often use a long sound. This is one of the most unexpected parts of writing katakana names, and students often write it incorrectly. For example, Nicole in English has a stress in the second syllable, ko, so we usually write Nicole. It's ultimately up to you to decide how you write your name, but if your name is pronounced Nicole and writing without a long sound would be somewhat outside the usual convention. But Nicholas will be just Nicholas because the stress is at the beginning. Similarly, Marina will likely become Marina. If you say Marina, it's a bit different from your name. And Christina becomes Christina. But this also needs to be compared with the convention of common katakana names. For example, Maria has a stress on the second syllable, but we usually write Maria. When you have a name with only one vowel, which is followed by one of P, T, D, K, S, G, or sh sound, then add a silent pause represented by a small t, also called sokuon. This is something students often use incorrectly when writing their names. For example, Pat becomes patto. Common mistake is to write as pato. It just doesn't sound right. Brad becomes burado. Nick becomes nick. You don't want to have the same pronunciation as meat in Japanese. Greg is Greg. Short names usually follow this convention, especially when the pattern occurs at the end of the name. In the previous tip, we talked about short names with only one vowel. However, names with more than one vowel, where at least one vowel is immediately followed by a P, T, D, K, or sh sound, you can also have a silent pause. However, we usually don't see two silent pauses in a single name. So if a name contains this pattern twice, only one of them will typically have a silent pause. For example, Pippa becomes Pippa. Patrick has two parts, Pat and Rick. So it becomes Patrick, only one silent pause. Russell becomes Russell. Keep in mind that this rule has lots of exceptions. Joshua has no silent pause in katakana name, but when it's changed to Josh, then it follows the convention from tip number 10 and you use a silent pause inserted. Patricia has AT, but you don't add the silent pause. If a famous person shares your name, check how it's written in Japanese. It helps with readability and pronunciation. Write your name based on its pronunciation, especially if it differs from English. For example, Diana may be written as Diana if your name is pronounced as English, but some other language would pronounce it as Diana, and you should write it as so. Similarly, Michael can be different in different languages. So is Anna and Julia. It's all about how you want your name to be pronounced. At the end of the day, your katakana name is your choice, but now you can make that choice confidently. If a famous person shares your name, use their convention. It's easier to recognize and remember. Write your name in katakana in the comments and include your original name in the alphabet too. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You can also join the daily quiz to test your Japanese knowledge. Be sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a new video when it's released. Thank you for watching.